Hey Nintendo fans and collectors! Lithium here for my channel Nintendo Collecting. On this week's episode, I am focusing on The Legend of Zelda. This is to kick off my Zelda week on YouTube. Questions this week include, what was the most difficult Zelda game for me to complete? Do I prefer linear or non-linear Zelda games? And lastly, do I like 2D Zelda games or 3D Zelda games better? All that and more on this week's episode of Question Lithium. Let's press start. Our first question for this Zelda week is from Old Mate Ultramatic on Twitter. At Collect Nintendo, do you prefer the 2D or 3D Zelda games? Before I even get to answering that question, please look at these games. There's some examples, not all, of the 2D Zelda games on my left and some examples of 3D Zelda games on my right. Please comment below, what style of game do you prefer, 2D or 3D? Because usually this is quite an opinionated question and I would love to hear your reasoning for liking 2D over 3D or 3D over 2D as well. I am knowledgeable about what Nintendo knows they can and cannot do. They know their limits and they know their system's capabilities. Traditionally, handheld consoles have less abilities, or basically they offer more limitations to Nintendo, so they tend to make more of their games in 2D on handheld consoles. Conversely, on home consoles, usually there's more graphical power, more the engine can handle, and they tend to make 3D games on home consoles. My personal preference, though, is the 3D Zelda games. And that's usually for one main reason. That's just because I feel more immersed when I play a 3D Zelda game. When I'm playing Ocarina of Time, for example, I love going into first-person mode, pulling out my slingshot or bow and arrow, and actually looking around the world with the X, Y, and Z axis to actually feel like I am Link. Another example, when I play Skyward Sword, one of the most recent Zelda games, I love holding the Wii remote and waggling it, yes, and it's one-to-one to actually feel like I am Link swinging my sword. I just simply feel more immersed in 3D Zelda games, so I really prefer those more, but please make sure you comment below because everyone's different. Do you prefer 2D Zelda games or 3D Zelda games? Thank you very much for your question. Our second question is from Facebook, from Brian Duong. What Zelda game was the most difficult for you to complete? Please note that I have never actually beat Zelda 2 on my own, which is probably the hardest Zelda game. First of all, let me start this by saying that The Legend of Zelda is actually one of my favorite franchises of all time, thus this Zelda week. A lot of the games I find actually pretty easy to complete, but there are some glaring omissions of games that are really difficult for me to get through, and that's for many different reasons. Of the roughly 15 games that are out, I think only 3 or 4 have given me a tremendous amount of problems, but there are a few that I have never beaten on my own single-handedly, which do include Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. I don't think I've ever beat that one on my own, and I have never beat the Minish Cap on my own either, so I need to get to those. So the hardest games for me to beat, for many different reasons, I'm going to give you 3 options. The first one, this is strange, The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker. You might be thinking, this game's really easy. It is actually quite easy, but the reason why this was so difficult for me to complete, because I was right at the end of the game, and I'll try and stay away from spoilers, but right before you go to the final boss, there is a extremely long side quest you need to complete of basically getting 8 things and then going to do more with those 8 things. So I think there's 16 different little fetch quests you need to do before you can go beat the final boss for this game. That really frustrated me. It almost ruined the experience because The Wind Waker is one of my favorite games. But that being said, if you have a Wii U, they completely fixed that in the Wii U version. So in this version, there's no longer that ridiculous side quest anymore. So now when I play through it on the Wii U, it's definitely one of my favorite Zelda games of all time. Another game that was extremely difficult for me to beat was, and this is another one that might be a little strange to a lot of people, but I'm not sure, this is Phantom Hourglass, The Legend of Zelda for the Nintendo DS. This one, again, not that hard. I think it's actually relatively easy. I just couldn't stand going back to the same Tower of the Ocean King over 5 times. It was just
was very repetitive. It was going back to the same thing. It actually felt like a lot of filler. Don't get me wrong, this is an excellent game. I grew tiresome, or it was tiresome, going back to that same dungeon over and over. So I really lost interest in this, and I just kept coming back to it basically to try and finish it. And the third one that I will talk about that was the hardest one for me to beat, and this one's more of a compliment to the game, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. This one is just such an epically massive game. The overworld takes forever to run, even if you're on Epona, across the entire world. It takes a very long time. It's such a huge game. I got really busy with school, I got really busy with my job, and say for example my girlfriend and sports, that I went away from the game. And if any of you play The Legend of Zelda, if you go away from the game and you try coming back to it, you almost feel lost. I wasn't really sure where I was, so I think I was at the Air Temple, or I can't even remember what it's called right now. Oh my gosh, comment below, what's that temple called? It's one of the last ones. And I really just had to get back into the game to try and complete it whenever I could. So because of that reason, it just took me forever to complete, because I didn't know what I was doing or where to go, and I got actually really confused with myself before I picked it back up and I completed that game. But please comment below, what is the hardest Zelda game for you to complete, and what game gave you the most difficulties? Thank you for your question.
Our last question from this episode is also from Facebook, from Riad Bećirević. Do you prefer a linear take on Zelda over a non-linear story, and which would you like to see in Zelda U?
This is another excellent debate, the debate between non-linear and linear The Legend of Zelda games. On my left, I have some non-linear Zelda games, at least in my opinion. The original The Legend of Zelda for the NES, also from the NES, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, and one of the most recent Zelda releases, probably the most recent Zelda release obviously, A Link Between Worlds on the 3DS. All of those seem to be completely non-linear. You can go to dungeons in the order that you so choose. However, obviously some are easier than others if you do them in a certain order. Other games from the series like Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword seemed very linear. They seemed very thought out, and they really felt like you were just following this quest that Link had to go on without any deviation really whatsoever. I am aware in Ocarina of Time, the game got to the point where you basically got to choose between two dungeons. You could do one before you do the other one, and I really enjoyed that freedom. I thought, wow, this is so cool. I finally get to choose where I can go next. Even though that open world was really awesome, even though I could go pretty much anywhere in the world at that point, I knew what dungeon I had to go next in sequential order up until that point. But when I played through A Link Between Worlds only a few months ago, and I also replayed it, I so much enjoyed that freedom and that choice that you could get and the creativity you almost felt when you were trying to beat the game and going to anywhere you want, in any dungeon you want, almost, in any order you want. I absolutely love that kind of game, and I am craving that kind of experience for a home console Zelda game. I really think it's high time, and Nintendo knows this, that they go back to that formula. They go back to the original The Legend of Zelda formula of having that open world with no storyline you absolutely have to follow, so that everyone's take when they play the game feels very subjective, and it feels very personalized towards your own gaming experience. Please comment below, do you prefer linear or non-linear Zelda games? I'd love to hear your opinion.
Thank you so much for watching this week's episode of Question Lithium, focusing on the Legend of Zelda series. If you need a Mario fix, be sure to check out that video in the top right hand corner for Wii U is Awesome Mario Kart 8. Be sure to check back throughout this week for more Zelda themed videos, and if I didn't answer your Zelda question, I hope to bring you one more answer every day for this entire week. Feel free to fill that like bucket, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, and remember, as always, go collect 'em all.